Most horror movies present a straightforward villain, a mask-wearing killer, a hallway-haunting ghost, a specific body coveted by a demon. The movie is about how the heroes overcome the adversity, or fail to, and then the film ends. This list isn't concerned with the sort of villain that can be simply dealt with. This list focuses on horror that aims larger, that puts not a rogue monster but a god on the trail of its victim. A deity worshipped by a cult, a god around whom towns build their existence, a god to which reality bends itself. Ancient god in this list encompasses three groups. The first are deities borrowed from real-world mythologies that horror movies have adopted and made their own, like Pazuzu and Paimon, gods literally extracted from religious and occult texts. Next is the Lovecraftian camp, the pantheon of the outer gods, such as Cthulhu and Dagon, who consider the entire human race the equivalent of noise at the end of a cosmic telescope. Last are deities wholly fabricated for horror in a distinctly pagan vein. The demon in Sinister named Bagul, the unseen forest god of the Ritual, the island goddess in Apostle. These have no basis in any established religion, but exist because the filmmakers want them to feel like an ancient religion rather than a new one. From oceanic sleeping titans to backyard bedroom demon kings to nameless harvest gods, and even a pantheon of them, there is something for everyone here on this list in terms of horrific divinity. We're working from strongest to weakness, that is. From deities so powerful that they can threaten the fabric of reality, all the way down to those whose reach is merely personal, intimate, and no less disgusting. Let's go! Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu, 2005. Any list of horror gods simply wouldn't be complete without the guy who effectively defined the genre. H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu, introduced in his eponymous 1928 short, and one of the most famous of his great old ones. But in lieu of a high-budget studio feature, the 2005 production by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, simply called The Call of Cthulhu, a low-budget indie endeavor that gets it exactly right through sheer gimmickry. It's a full-blown black-and-white silent movie shot in a period-accurate 1920 style. It plays like a found film from around the time of the original story, right down to the title cards. The suspenseful score and the expressionistic sets reminiscent of Metropolis and Nosferatu. A project that many critics considered unfilmable turned out to be one of the most faithful Lovecraft adaptations ever brought to screen. It details the efforts of a man sorting through the research of his recently deceased great-uncle into a cult that worships the titular entity, a god-sized monstrosity hibernating in the water city of Erlier in the depths of the Pacific. The film shows cultists across the world converging on isolated swampland and dark alleys, patiently awaiting his reawakening. Sounds insane, doesn't it? When sailors inadvertently break the spell, the Call of Cthulhu offers a glorious, money-worthy shot. Cthulhu rising out of that impossible city, rendered by a fully articulated 100-point puppet. The horror of this movie is less about brute force and more about scale. There isn't really anyone Cthulhu is going after. The mythological implication of his rising is the end of human dominion on Earth, and the end of your individual sanity. You're not the hero. You're not even the supporting cast. Dagon, 2001. Continuing our dive into Lovecraft, this time to a slightly smaller scale, we find Dagon, 2001 Stuart Gordon film that draws on a pair of Lovecraft's works, the short story Dagon and the novella The Shadow over Innsmouth. Following his previous adaptations, Reanimator and From Beyond, Gordon transplants the action from Lovecraft's New England setting to a dilapidated fishing village on the Spanish coast, which he appropriately calls Imboca, basically Lovecraft's fictional town of Innsmouth. Let's take a look at the story. A young couple's vacation takes a turn when their boat wrecks and they wash ashore in Imboca. They quickly discover that the villagers are different. Grayish and slick, their faces bear fish-like features and have an ability to go completely missing after dusk. Through the town drunk, an ex-fisherman immortalized in his last screen performance by the late Francisco Rabal, they discover Imboca's Faustian bargain, or simply put, the bet that was made with the devil years ago. Generations ago, the village turned their back on God and took to worshipping an ancient sea god, Dagon, in exchange for prosperity and wealth. But the god's generosity came at a cost. His blessings turned them into generations of monstrous fish people. Instead of the cosmic, faraway dread of Cthulhu, Dagon's terror is immediate, visceral. It's the horrific slow burn of a community that chose prosperity and continues to suffer for it, generation after generation. Dagon, the monster, only appears fully in the last act of the film, but he's omnipresent throughout, still demanding sacrifice and not particularly caring what's left of humanity in the bargain. The Great Old Ones and the Outer Gods. Multiple movies. Each of the three gods that are going to be mentioned are uniquely defined in Lovecraft's own work, even though rarely featured in film adaptations. Azathoth is frequently identified by Lovecraft as the blind idiot god, nuclear chaos, and the daemon sultan, existing in the physical center of infinity where monstrous musicians play instruments to keep the unthinkably stupid god dreaming the entire universe. He appears in Lovecraft's writings from 1919, gets fleshed out in 1927's The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. And while Lovecraft never gives him any physical appearance at all, making him extremely difficult to depict on screen, he is an embodiment of sheer unintelligent chaos, rather than an individual god you might actually battle. By contrast, Yog-Sothoth, a character in the Dunwich Horror 1929, as the biological father of the twins and also the literal gate and the key of space and time, also known as the All-in-One and One-in-All, was the subject of a feature film of the same name starring Dean Stockwell, about a family secretly trying to summon their half-divine baby to reality. Third on our list, Nyarlathotep, also known sometimes as Crawling Chaos, is one outer god with a bit of a personality. He's intelligent and indeed outright derisive to the powers that he allegedly serves, and the human cults who serve him. Nyarlathotep often serves as Lovecraft's messenger, and has the only direct involvement in the actions of humans, as the other two are aloof and distant. Beyond the Dunwich Horror, films in that broader cosmic Lovecraft mode that rarely rely on secret rituals, gates to otherworldly dimensions, and general reality distortion instead of a specific revealed deity, include Stuart Gordon's From Beyond, 1986, which, while not naming a god directly, does evoke the scientists or cultists open a gate to something alien and incomprehensible phenomenon. Pazuzu, The Exorcist, 1973. From fiction, we move to something much more frightening, simply because it is true. Pazuzu, the spirit that is the source of Regan's possession in William Friedkin's 1973 horror classic, The Exorcist. Pazuzu was not dreamed up by a scriptwriter, nor borrowed from the canon of H.P. Lovecraft, but he was an actual demon god in ancient Mesopotamian religion. In Assyrian and Babylonian thought, Pazuzu was linked with wind, drought, and plague, though he was ironically seen to offer protection against evil spirits. The opening sequence, in which Father Marin, Max von Sydow, removes a small Pazuzu statuette from a 4,000-year-old archaeological dig in the ruins of Hatra, northern Iraq, only to come upon a gigantic stone sculpture of the demon in the desert, his stone wings splayed and his canine snout contorted into a grimace, all silhouetted by a descending sun with a pair of dogs fighting in the foreground, has one of the best cold openings in the history of the genre. It is at once slow, quiet, and far more unnerving than any sudden startle or gash. This, of course, sets up the rest of the movie, the possession of young Regan McNeil in Georgetown, and the subsequent Catholic exorcism that places Father Karras, Jason Miller, and Father Marin in a showdown with a spirit older than their religion itself, by millennia. The profound fear that The Exorcist unleashes is not only in the body horror elements, but also in the implied diminishing of Christian rites itself, ones that are thousands of years old in tradition, by an even more ancient earthly horror. Paimon, Hereditary, 2018. Paimon comes again from actual occult lore. This time it is the Lesser Key of Solomon, a 17th century occult grimoire in which Paimon is one of the 8 kings of hell. He is said to appear mounted upon a camel, trumpets proclaiming his arrival, and he knows of all secret things. Ari Aster directly lifted the name from that grimoire for Hereditary, and if you saw Hereditary, then you'll understand why he landed this high up. The slow revealing horror movie has its central revelation in the truth that Annie's long-dead mother was actually leading a cult, all of whose goals revolved around finding a vessel for Paimon's spirit, specifically a vessel that was male and her own descendant. According to the version of the Paimon lore that exists within Hereditary, a male host is needed if Paimon is to achieve his fullest, most powerful form. Charlie was Paimon's host from birth, but following her death, the film's final acts were all about a transfer of the demonic spirit to Annie's other child, Peter, through various means such as accidental beheading, stage accident, and a sketchbook of creepy symbols. In the finale treehouse scene, Peter has been entirely taken over by the spirit, crowned and hailed by the naked and devoted cult, with his decapitated mother hovering inches away. The scene itself plays like an actual coronation, to the point where Astor reportedly used grimoire passages describing proper worship of the demon for his film dialogue. That is what takes Paimon from the realm of demons who have come to play to the realm of God who has finally received the worship and the flesh he deserved. By the film's final shot, Paimon isn't so much hunting a victim as he is being consecrated into existence. Bughuul, Sinister, 2012. Bughuul brings into the list the realm of completely original gods here who have no real-world connection at all, although they certainly try to sell it as ancient. In Sinister, true crime writer Ellison Oswalt, the character played by Ethan Hawke, moves into a house where a family has recently been murdered and discovers an old box of Super 8 film. The film contains disturbing evidence of multiple families' murders going back several decades. These horrific events are somehow all linked together through a particular symbol and the presence of a pallid, faceless figure in the periphery of all the movies. The film's character, Professor Jonas, says the symbol is the signature of an ancient pagan god who eats children's souls, dragging them to some sort of other dimension through these filmed visions. From the story perspective, the god Bughuul is a fake, fabricated by film scribes Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill for the film. He was, though, intentionally given a Babylonian-esque genesis, and the film hints he might be the evil brother of the real ancient Canaanite god Moloch, a god tied to child sacrifice. Bughuul's originality comes in how he manifests. He doesn't just possess individual children, he actually uses images and videotapes, making each recorded family murder a sort of ritual sacrifice for the next group of children. The Old Gods, Cabin in the Woods, 2011. The following one functions on two levels at once, which is what is great about it. In Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon's The Cabin in the Woods, 5 college kids rent a cabin for the weekend, only to start acting out all of the classic horror tropes imaginable, before revealing their pawns of a shadowy organization performing a global ritual that satisfies ancient entities called Ancient Ones, who were formerly slumbering in the deep. The 5 victims must be ritualistic sacrifices in the form of specific archetypes: the athlete, the scholar, the virgin, the whore, and the fool, in order, or all will be consumed. Apparently, every culture has their own equivalent of such a ritual tailored to the country's particular style of horror, as shown in the movie, from the Japanese J-horror one shown on one of the monitors to the kaiju one on another. If it's not concluded with the designated sacrificial sequence of actions, then the end scene of the movie is what happens. It included 2 survivors named Marty and Dana, who turned down participation in such an act, as seen in the final scene of the movie, which led to an inhuman giant hand emerging from beneath the ground level, towering over the vegetation and trees around it, and awakening the ancients to destroy everything in the world. Sounds chilling. An ironic and indeed a witty aspect of the Ancient Ones is how they double as the hungry horror fans, who constantly need appeasing to satiate their need for a good horror trope and storyline, indirectly labeling us as the gods, while the horror genre does its regular sacrifices for us. Wow, what an amazing perspective. The Harvest God, The Wicker Man, 1973. Of all the films that can truly be called great British folk horror, director Robin Hardy's The Wicker Man works so effectively precisely because you barely realize until the last 10 to 15 minutes that you are, in fact, watching a movie about a god. Sergeant Neil Howie, a rigid mainland Christian policeman, arrives on the remote Scottish island of Summerisle looking for a missing girl, but instead finds a whole community led by the impeccably dressed and aristocratic Lord Summerisle that has dropped Christianity to embrace a resuscitated pagan religion focused on fertility and the harvest. Howie spends the bulk of the film's runtime appalled by the perceived moral decay he witnesses, the public sexually suggestive rituals, the public and frankly casual nudity, the pagan symbology being taught in the village school, while remaining unaware of the island's true desperate need until he has already failed at every conceivable attempt to save the girl he is searching for. Last year's harvest failed, and the islanders can only fix it with the sacrifice of a very specific kind of victim, a willing fool, arriving of his own accord, an authority figure, and a virgin. Poor Howie ticks every single one of those boxes. The film's unforgettable finale is horror filmmaking at its finest. Howie locked inside the burning Wicker Man, a giant human-sized wicker doll/effigy, to appease the sun and orchard gods of Summer Isle, while the townsfolk sing folk music around the burning edifice, a fate so utterly devoid of humanity it is chilling in the extreme. They never appear as individuals or bear personal names, only as functions. The sun god, the orchard goddess, nothing in the story matters more than the idea of a nameless, formless deity. Motor, The Ritual 2017. The Ritual, adapted from the 2011 novel by Adam Neville, sees four friends honor their dead comrade on a trekking tour across the Swedish Kungsleden Trail. They wind up going off the beaten path when one of them gets hurt and takes an alternate route through an ancient forest, where they begin to encounter unsettling objects, an eviscerated and suspended moose, runic inscriptions, and a twig dummy that looks like a disembodied headless torso with antlers instead of fingers. Later, they become the prey of an isolated village cult that worships a Jotun, a being in Norse myth that constitutes a race of giants who were often in position to gods like Odin and Thor, and specifically referred to as Loki's bastard offspring. In Neville's source material, the entity has a name, Moder, a term that is a literal mother translation in a variety of Scandinavian languages. The actual film's monster is an enormous elk with a thing that appears to be a disembodied head to torso with antlers. When a villager succumbs to Moder, they receive a sort of horrific eternal life. Those who refuse become the sacrifice. The cult only gives potential victims two options: kneel and praise or die. A fairly simplistic definition of a god-cult relationship if you've ever seen one. What gives Moder that extra creepy edge, aside from the awesome CGI, is the mythos behind it. The ritual not just pits our four doomed tourists against an entirely unknown monster, it also grounds their fear in the real Norse cosmology, but then takes a gap that the real Norse people neglected to fill in. The Island Goddess, Apostle, 2018. Ending our list, we have Apostle, a 2018 folk horror period drama from Gareth Evans that takes place on a remote Welsh island in 1905 called Eriston. Thomas Richardson, Dan Stevens, has gone undercover as a religious convert, masquerading as one to infiltrate a cult that is keeping his kidnapped sister. The leader of this cult is a charismatic one, going by the name of Malcolm Howe, who also built the cult. Malcolm's entire group lives under the mantra that the island that was once barren would be made fertile through blood sacrifices. However, as the film gets further into it, it is revealed that this isn't folklore. The cult actually has an old goddess involved, and this nature goddess was captured by the original island's inhabitants decades earlier. This goddess has been chained to a barn where they keep her fed with the lifeblood, first animal, then the blood of their community, and later under the reign of the island's most psychotic leader, the Blood of Outsiders. She's less an otherworld goddess and more of a shackled, farmed goddess. The ending of Apostle has Thomas free the nature goddess at quite an enormous personal expense, and ends with him joining the land himself. Unlike the other deities on the list, she isn't the villain, she's the victim. So, should we really be the ones who are afraid? Once we discover we can control a god instead of just worshipping it, we can turn against it. So that was the whole list. 10 gods of myth that take your horror movies and make them less like a slasher and more like the classics that were inspired by myths and legends themselves. A couple of them use their cosmic bigness like Cthulhu, Dagon, and the generally related mythos gods to make you feel tiny and inconsequential in comparison to something vast and unknowable, while others, Pazuzu, Paimon, Bogul, etc., actually draw from existing and somewhat believable religions and occult beliefs, to demonstrate how old belief systems can still get to you. Then there's the kind of god you see more often, folk horror style. The sun god on Summer Isle, the figure of Moder deep in the woods of Sweden, the land goddess shackled on a Welsh island where whole communities and entire landscapes become shrines to some half-perceived antique power. So out of all of them, which one got under your skin the most, and is there any difference when it comes down to it, between whether you like a cosmic god who's almost never seen, or a folk kind of god whose followers seem entirely dedicated to him or her? Because be it the sea god who transforms a village into merpeople, a demon king who has to settle for being crowned in a suburban treehouse, or the Jotun from the deep woods demanding a lifetime of subservience in exchange for a lifetime of being, it remains that it's never really the monster at the center of the movie that matters more than the god behind him.